It was the kind of call that no parent ever forgets. The one that tears through the quiet, cuts into your sleep, and changes the rhythm of your heartbeat forever. It came at 2:13 a.m. The phone on my nightstand buzzed violently in the dark. I remember the blue glow on the ceiling, the way my wife, Claire, stirred beside me, half awake, murmuring, "Who is it?" I didn't know yet. But something in my chest already did. "Mr. Miller?" The voice on the line was female, strained but composed. "This is St. Mary's Hospital. Your son, Ethan Miller, he's been in a car accident. He's in critical condition. You need to come immediately." Everything inside me went still. The words didn't make sense at first, like a language I'd never learned. I repeated them to Claire, but they felt foreign in my mouth. She sat up, wide-eyed, hands trembling before the meaning sank in. 15 minutes later, we were on the road. I can still hear the sound of the rain hitting the windshield, the wipers dragging too slow, Claire whispering prayers under her breath, as if her voice alone could keep him alive until we got there. The hospital parking lot was half empty, a lonely patch of fluorescent light cutting through the dark. The world felt smaller there, quieter, like it knew something sacred was breaking inside us. When we entered the ICU, the smell of disinfectant and metal filled the air. A young nurse led us to a small waiting area. "The surgeon will speak with you soon," she said softly. The clock on the wall said 3:07 a.m. That hour didn't belong to the living, it belonged to fear, to whispered questions, to silent bargaining with a God I hadn't spoken to in years. The surgeon finally came. A man in his 50s, face tired but honest. "Your son sustained multiple internal injuries," he said. "Head trauma, fractured ribs, a ruptured spleen. We've stabilized him for now, but," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "his chances of recovery are minimal." Claire's knees gave out. I caught her before she fell, but the weight of her grief hit me like a blow. I wanted to ask the man what minimal meant, 10%? 5? None? But he was already moving on, explaining procedures and timelines that I couldn't hear over the roar in my ears. When they finally let us in, I almost didn't recognize my son. He lay there, tubes in his arms, a ventilator breathing for him, his face pale and swollen, dark hair matted with blood. The last time I'd seen him, he was laughing, tossing his keys in the air, telling me he was just going out for a bit. That was 3 days ago. I stood at his bedside and tried to find the right words, but there aren't any for moments like that. There's only silence, the kind that eats at you from the inside. Claire sat down beside him and took his hand, whispering his name like a prayer. When the nurses came to adjust the monitors, I stepped back. I didn't want to be in their way. Truth was, I didn't know what to do with my hands, my body, my fear. After a while, Claire said she needed to call her sister, to tell her what happened, to ask her to come. She walked out into the hallway, clutching her phone, her shoulders trembling. And then it was just me and Ethan. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the room. Each sound was a reminder that he was still here, that, somehow, a small part of him was still fighting. I sat in the chair beside his bed and stared at him, tracing every bruise, every scratch, every place life had broken him. My mind wandered to his childhood, scraped knees, his first bike, the day he left for college. I remembered the look he gave me then, confident, impatient, eager to be his own man. When had he stopped being that little boy who came running to me after every fall? When did he start hiding his pain instead of showing it? The nurse came in quietly, leaving a folded blanket at the foot of the bed. She smiled at me with the kind of sympathy only hospital staff can give, the kind they learn after seeing 1,000 families fall apart in the same room. After she left, I noticed Ethan's jacket hanging over the back of a chair, black leather, scratched on one side. I picked it up instinctively, brushing off a speck of dirt. The collar was torn, the fabric cold and damp. I thought folding it might help me calm down, something small to focus on, something human in a room that felt so mechanical. As I folded the sleeves, I felt a weight in the inner lining. Something small, rigid, hidden. I reached in and pulled it out. An envelope. It was sealed. My name, Dad, was written across the front in Ethan's handwriting. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My throat tightened. Why would he write me a letter? When? I looked at him again, still, motionless, the machine's rhythm steady beside him. Every instinct told me to wait, to show it to Claire, to do the right thing. But something else, something deeper, almost primal, told me that this was meant for me alone. I broke the seal. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. His handwriting was rushed, uneven, but it was unmistakably his. Dad, if you're reading this, it means something's gone wrong. Please don't panic. There's something I've been keeping from you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to protect you. Go to storage unit 142. You'll understand everything when you get there. My heart sank. Storage unit 142? What could possibly be so important, or so dangerous, that my son would hide it from me, and only tell me about it after an accident. I looked around the room, half expecting someone to walk in and explain what this was. But no one came. Only the steady, indifferent beep of the monitors answered me. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. Somewhere beyond those walls, life went on, ambulances wailed, nurses rushed past, the world kept spinning. But mine had stopped. Because now I knew two things. My son wasn't just fighting for his life. He was keeping a secret, one that I was never meant to find out like this. And whatever waited behind the door of storage unit 142. I wasn't sure I was ready to know. I didn't sleep that night. The ICU chair was too stiff, the air too cold, the silence too loud. Claire had dozed off in the corner, her hand still clutching Ethan's. She was murmuring something in her sleep, maybe his name, maybe a prayer. But I couldn't close my eyes. That envelope lay on my lap, the edges worn now from how tightly I'd been holding it. I'd already read his words a dozen times, each line burning deeper into my mind. Go to storage unit 142. You'll understand everything. Understand what? What could my son possibly have wanted to tell me like this, in secrecy, through a letter meant for after something went wrong? It was nearly dawn when I stepped out of the room. The hospital corridors were empty, just the hum of vending machines and the flicker of overhead lights that made everything look unreal. I walked until I found the small chapel at the end of the hall. Inside, it was dark, a single candle burning near the cross. I sat down on the wooden pew and let the exhaustion finally settle into my bones. When your child is fighting for his life, your thoughts don't make sense. You swing between guilt and denial, between wanting to scream and wanting to disappear. And for me, in that moment, every road led to the same question: what had Ethan been hiding? I tried to remember the last few months. He'd been distant, that much was clear. Cancelled dinners. Missed calls. Late nights with vague excuses about work stuff. I'd assumed it was the usual mid-20s struggle, trying to figure out who you are, pretending you don't need anyone. But now, I wasn't sure. The thought that my son had a secret life, one big enough to require a locked storage unit and a goodbye letter, made something inside me twist painfully. At 7 a.m., the nurse came in to check his vitals. Claire stirred awake, her eyes swollen and red. The doctor followed a few minutes later. He said Ethan was stable for now, but his tone was the kind that doctors use when they don't want to give false hope. Claire started crying again. I put my arm around her, but my mind was already elsewhere, replaying that single line from the letter over and over. By noon, she said she needed to go home, shower, and grab a few things. I told her I'd stay. She kissed Ethan's forehead, whispered something, and left. When the door closed behind her, I finally pulled the letter from my pocket again. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. There was fear in those words, but also control. It wasn't a desperate message. It was planned. Thought out. That realization hit me hard. He knew something could happen to him. I took out my phone and searched storage units near St. Mary's. There were 3. The second one, LockSafe Storage, Route 18, had a Unit 142 listed on their site map. I stared at it, the address glowing faintly on my screen. A normal father would have called the police. Or waited. Or told his wife. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking like a rational man. I was thinking like a father whose son had just written him a final message, and who couldn't stand the idea of another unanswered question. So I made a decision. I'd go there. Just to look. Just to understand. Before leaving, I went back into Ethan's room one more time. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of the ventilator. Machines blinked in patterns I didn't understand. I reached out, touched his hand. "I don't know what this is, kid," I whispered. "But I'll find out. I promise." Then I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into its envelope, and put it in my jacket pocket. The drive to Route 18 took 20 minutes. The morning light had that strange gray hue that comes after a storm. Everything looked washed out, fragile. The storage facility sat behind a chain-link fence, rows of dull metal doors stretching out in both directions. A man in a red flannel vest was sitting in the small front office, sipping coffee and staring at his phone. "Can I help you?" he asked as I walked in. "Yeah. My son, Ethan Miller, he rents a unit here. 142. He squinted at his computer. "Unit 142, yeah, been renting it about a year. Always pays cash, on time. Good tenant." Cash. My son never had much cash. He worked part-time at an auto shop, barely making rent. Where had he gotten the money for this? "Is everything okay?" the man asked, noticing the look on my face. "Yeah," I lied. "Just need to take a look at his stuff. He's not able to right now." He hesitated. "Well, technically, the unit's in his name, but if you're next of kin." I handed him my ID before he could finish. "I'm his father." He nodded and pulled out a clipboard. All right, Mr. Miller. Just sign here. Unit 142 was halfway down the row. The lock clicked open with a hollow sound that echoed in my chest. When I rolled the door up, the smell of oil and dust drifted out. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing shelves, boxes, and something large covered with a tarp. I hesitated before pulling it back. A motorcycle. Black, scratched, the kind of thing my son would have loved but never mentioned owning. My pulse quickened. On the seat was a folder, manila, worn, taped shut. I tore it open. Inside were documents. Receipts. Emails. Bank transfers. Some with my name on them. At first I thought it was a mistake, some weird financial paperwork he'd accidentally taken from home. But then I saw the signatures. Not mine. Then photos. My company's logo. My business partner, Marcus, shaking hands with strangers I didn't recognize. Under one image was a note in Ethan's handwriting. Dad, this is what I found. Marcus has been using your credentials. It's bigger than you think. I didn't know who to trust. I felt dizzy. The concrete floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Marcus. My best friend for 20 years. The man who'd stood next to me at Ethan's baptism. The man I'd trusted with my life. The rest of the folder was filled with proof, transfers, forged documents, even a USB drive labeled backup. At the bottom, one more note. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. The sound of my own heartbeat filled the space. I looked around that cold metal room, at the secrets my son had been carrying alone, and something inside me broke. He hadn't just been a victim of an accident. He'd been caught in something far worse. And I knew then that the letter wasn't just a message. It was a warning. I don't remember leaving the storage facility. I just remember the folder in my hands, the weight of it, the way my fingers trembled as I flipped through each page like I was peeling back layers of my own blindness. Rain started to fall again, soft at first, then harder. By the time I reached the car, my clothes were soaked through, but I barely noticed. I sat in the driver's seat, engine off, staring at the papers spread across my lap under the dim yellow light from the street lamp. Emails between Marcus and names I didn't recognize. Foreign bank accounts. My digital signature on transfer authorizations I never made. He'd used me. My company. My reputation. And somehow, my son had found it all before I did. I pressed my palms into my eyes and let out a sound I didn't know I was capable of, something between anger and grief. For a long time, I'd thought Ethan was drifting, reckless, aimless. I'd lectured him about responsibility, about growing up. And all this time, he'd been carrying my mistakes. Cleaning up a mess I hadn't even realized existed. When I finally started the car, my reflection in the mirror didn't look like me. It looked like a man who'd just discovered that his own child had been braver than him. I drove straight to the police station. The desk sergeant looked up as I entered, dripping rain onto the tiled floor. "Can I help you, sir?" "I need to report financial fraud," I said. "And possibly, something worse." They took me to a small interview room, beige walls, fluorescent lights, the kind of place that squeezes the truth out of you whether you're ready or not. I laid the folder on the table and began explaining everything, the company, Marcus, my son, the letter, the accident. The officer's expression changed as he read through the documents. He called in another detective, then another. Before long, there were 3 of them flipping through pages, whispering to each other, jotting notes. Finally, one of them, a woman named Detective Harris, looked up and said, "Mr. Miller, this looks serious. If what you're saying is accurate, your business partner may be tied to an ongoing investigation we've been working on. Fraud, offshore laundering, shell companies, it fits." I felt a cold wave pass through me. "Then my son?" She paused. "You said the crash might not have been an accident?" I nodded slowly. "He wrote that in his note. Said if anything happened, it wouldn't be an accident." She exchanged a look with the others. "We'll look into it. But for now, go home, Mr. Miller. Get some rest. We'll contact you as soon as we know more." Rest. The word felt obscene. When I got back to the hospital, Claire was sitting where I'd left her, slumped forward, hands clasped, eyes red. She looked up as I entered. "Where were you?" I froze. I hadn't prepared a lie. "I just needed some air," I said. She studied my face, searching for something. Then she sighed. "The doctor said there's no change. He's still unresponsive." I nodded, unable to speak. We sat there in silence. The kind that fills every space between people who are breaking differently. I wanted to tell her everything, about the letter, the unit, the folder. But how could I? How do you tell a mother who's already drowning in grief that her son might have been targeted? That the people you trusted most might have put him in that hospital bed? So I said nothing. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped, monitors blinked, and the world kept moving while ours stood still. At one point, I pulled out the USB drive from my pocket, the one Ethan had labeled backup. I stared at it like it was radioactive. Whatever was on it had cost him something. Maybe everything. I slipped it back into the envelope. I wasn't ready. Not yet. The next morning, Detective Harris called. Her tone was sharp, professional. "Mr. Miller, we've confirmed that your business partner, Marcus Hayes, is under investigation. He's connected to a money laundering operation spanning multiple accounts, including some under your company's name. We're issuing a warrant for his arrest." My breath caught. Does that mean my son? We can't make assumptions yet. But given what you found, we'll be re-examining the crash. The crash. The word didn't fit anymore. It wasn't a random accident, it was a loose end someone had tried to cut. I thanked her and hung up. Then I turned to Ethan. He looked smaller somehow. Fragile, pale, but alive. And that was enough to keep me standing. I sat down beside him and whispered, "You were right, son. About everything. They're investigating Marcus now." Of course, he didn't respond. His chest moved up and down with the ventilator's rhythm, mechanical and steady. But I like to believe that somewhere, deep in that fog his mind was trapped in, he could still hear me. 2 days later, everything happened at once. Marcus was arrested at his home. It made the evening news, local entrepreneur detained in financial crimes investigation. The report was vague, but the image of him in handcuffs was enough to make my stomach turn. When I showed the clip to Detective Harris, she said, "If your son hadn't found that evidence, Mr. Miller, we might not have caught him. He's been covering his tracks for years." I should have felt vindicated. Relieved. But I didn't. All I felt was shame. Because while Ethan was digging into this, risking God knows what, I'd been lecturing him for being irresponsible. For not thinking about his future. For not being enough like me. The irony was cruel. He'd been trying to protect me the entire time. That night, as I sat in his ICU room again, I unfolded the letter one more time. The words were beginning to fade along the creases where I'd handled them too much. "You'll understand everything." I did now. And it broke me. I reached for his hand. "You were always stronger than I knew, Ethan," I whispered. "I just wish I'd told you that before all this." The machine beeped softly, steady as ever. But for the first time since that call in the middle of the night, I felt something shift inside me, not hope exactly, but a kind of belief that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't done fighting yet. Because if my son could face all of this alone, then maybe he wasn't ready to let go. And neither was I. 3 weeks passed. Hospitals have their own kind of time, slow, heavy, and cruel. Days blur together, measured only by shift changes and the rhythmic pulse of machines. I learned every sound in that room, the beep of the monitor, the hiss of oxygen, the whisper of nurses changing 4 lines. I learned what real helplessness feels like. But I also learned that sometimes, miracles don't come suddenly. They come quietly, one breath at a time. It was a Tuesday morning when the nurse noticed it first. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, his fingers just moved. I looked up from my chair, thinking I'd imagined it. But then I saw it, the smallest twitch of his hand. Barely there, but real. My heart started pounding. "Ethan? Son, can you hear me?" Nothing. Just the machines. But a few seconds later, his eyelids fluttered. A weak sound escaped his throat, something between a groan and a breath. The nurse pressed the call button, her voice calm but urgent. "Doctor, we have responsiveness." The next few hours were a blur, doctors, nurses, tests, questions. They said it was too early to know the extent of recovery, but I didn't care. He was there. He was fighting his way back. When they finally let me sit beside him again, his eyes were half open. Groggy. Lost. But when they landed on me, I swear I saw recognition flicker in them. I took his hand. "You're safe now," I whispered. "It's over." His lips moved slowly. "Dad, did you find it?" I froze. He remembered. "Yes," I said quietly. "I found the letter. The unit. Everything." He exhaled, a faint smile forming at the corner of his mouth. "Knew you would." His voice cracked halfway through, weak but alive. "You did good, son," I said. "You saved us. You saved the company, the family, everything." He blinked slowly, a single tear sliding down his cheek. "Did they get him?" "They did," I said. "Marcus is gone. The police have everything." He closed his eyes, relief washing over his face. "Good." Then, after a long pause, he whispered something I'll never forget. "I wasn't scared for me, Dad. I was scared for you." My throat tightened. I couldn't answer. There are no words that fit inside a moment like that, only the silence between them. Ethan's recovery was slow, but steady. Within a week, he was breathing on his own. Within 2, he could sit up. The doctors called it a remarkable turnaround. I called it grace. The investigators came to the hospital to speak with him once he was strong enough. They confirmed everything. Marcus had been using my identity to authorize offshore transactions. When Ethan discovered it, by accident, while helping our accountant update digital files, he confronted Marcus directly. That's when the threats began. Subtle at first. Then not so subtle. Marcus had told him to stay out of things he didn't understand. A week later, Ethan's brakes failed on a wet road. It hadn't been an accident at all. Detective Harris told us the crash report had been reopened. They found tampering. Enough to charge Marcus with attempted homicide on top of the fraud. When I heard it, something inside me broke again, not in pain this time, but in the quiet, terrible awareness of how close I'd come to losing everything because of my own trust. And yet, despite it all, my son lived. One evening, about a month after the crash, I walked into his hospital room and found him staring out the window. The sunset painted the walls gold. He looked thinner, paler, but there was light in his eyes again. He turned to me and smiled faintly. "You know," he said, "you always told me to be responsible. To think before I act." I laughed softly. "Guess you beat me at my own advice." He chuckled, a weak, careful sound, but it was the best thing I'd heard in months. "I didn't mean to keep it from you," he said after a pause. "I just didn't want you to feel like it was your fault." I sat down beside him. "Ethan, listen to me. You did what I should have done. You saw the truth when I refused to. You were brave when I wasn't. And I'll never forget that." He looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just didn't want to lose you." That was when I realized something I hadn't before, that courage doesn't always look like defiance or strength. Sometimes, it looks like a quiet decision made alone, for someone else's sake. The day he was discharged, the whole ICU staff came to say goodbye. Claire cried when they wheeled him out. I don't think I've ever seen her hold someone that tightly. Outside, the air was crisp. The city noise felt louder, brighter, like the world had color again. We drove home in silence. At a red light, Ethan looked at me and said, "You ever think about how fast life changes?" I smiled. "Every day." He nodded slowly, watching the road ahead. "Guess all we can do is make sure we don't waste what we get." Months later, when the trial ended, I sat in the courtroom as Marcus was sentenced. He didn't look at me once. Maybe out of shame. Maybe out of pride. It didn't matter. The prosecutor called Ethan to testify. His voice was steady, calm. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he said only this: "I just hope everyone in this room understands that truth always finds a way out, no matter how hard someone tries to bury it." I'll never forget the silence that followed. Proud doesn't begin to describe it. Life has a way of humbling you when you least expect it. I used to think being a father meant teaching your child how to be strong. But I was wrong. Sometimes, it means learning from them instead. Ethan's scars healed, but some days, when the light hits just right, I still see the faint line along his temple. A reminder. A scar that tells a story neither of us will ever forget. Now, every time I pass that old storage facility, I slow down. The door to Unit 142 is closed again, empty now. But I can still feel what it meant. It was more than a secret. It was the space between who my son was, and who he became. And somewhere inside that space, I found the truth I'd been blind to for years. That the strongest thing a man can do is not protect his child, but let his child save him.